The Seahawks have yet to name an offensive or defensive coordinator. Could their candidate be coaching this weekend in the Super Bowl? I'll be diving in on a new Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, the host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. A special thanks, as always, to all the 12s out there, whether you're listening in Hillsborough, Oregon, or Auckland, New Zealand. Thank you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. The Seahawks have yet to name an offensive or defensive coordinator. Might their ideal candidate be getting ready to coach this weekend in the Super Bowl? I'll be taking a close look. Plus, linebackers to watch at last week's Senior Bowl who could be on the radar for the Seahawks. And Devon Witherspoon going for Rookie of the Year. Should he be the front runner when the award is given out tonight? I'll be breaking all that down on a jam-packed Thursday episode brought your way by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. And use the code all lowercase LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Now for your lead story here on our Thursday edition of Locked On Seahawks. It has now been a week since Seattle officially introduced head coach Mike Macdonald, the 9th head coach in Seahawks franchise history. And the team still has got vacancies on offense and defense, significant ones. Offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator. We've been breaking down a number of the candidates that have either been interviewed or linked to those coaching positions. But to this point, there hasn't been a hire on offense or defense from a coordinating standpoint. And that made me wonder, could there be a candidate or two, or maybe there's more than that the Seahawks want to talk to that will be coaching on Sunday in the Super Bowl between the Chiefs and the 49ers? Obviously, when you're looking at the two best teams in the NFL this year, they are battling for a Lombardi trophy. Those teams typically have coaches that get plucked by other teams. And there's a few of them that have already been linked to coaching positions elsewhere. Clint Kubiak, who is right now the assistant passing game coordinator for the 49ers. There have already been rumors that he's going to become the new offensive coordinator for the Saints, for example. So some of these coaches are going to be going elsewhere already. But certainly there are some interesting names on both these staffs that could be interesting candidates for the Seattle Seahawks. And I'm going to start with the first one that has been already reported last week, actually. Joe Cullen, the defensive line coach for the Kansas City Chiefs. He is being pursued as a potential defensive coordinator option for the Seahawks. And this one is really a natural fit from a familiarity standpoint. Joe Cullen coached 5 years in Baltimore as a defensive line coach from 2016 to 2020. Mike Macdonald was on the staff throughout those 5 years. So these guys know each other really well. Macdonald coached secondary and linebackers during that time. So these two had to work together when they were putting together entire defensive game plans. They were involved in that process. And so there is that familiarity. And Cullen's got a really long track record of success in the NFL. He started in Detroit from 2006 to 2008 as the defensive line coach. Then he was in Jacksonville from 2010 to 2012. He's been with Cleveland, Tampa Bay. He had that really good stint of 5 years in Baltimore. He was the defensive coordinator for the Jacksonville Jaguars in 2021. And then the last 2 years, he has been in Kansas City, resuming his role as defensive line coach. And it keeps going back to that central theme here. We've already talked about a couple other names being considered for that defensive coordinator position, and there seems to be an emphasis on the defensive line. And that's understandable because Mike Macdonald, he's got a linebacker and secondary background. You've got Carl Scott, who is a secondary coach that is back on staff. Leslie Frazier, your assistant head coach, he was a defensive back for the '85 Bears. That is his specialty, coaching defensive backs. So they could use some defensive line coaching, and somebody like Joe Cullen, who has been a defensive coordinator. And I'll say this, you go back to his one season in Jacksonville, you have to pity anyone that had to deal with the circus that was coaching for Urban Meyer that year. There's some really good coaches that were on that staff. Sanjay Lal, we've seen what he's done as a receivers coach for the Seahawks. That year was a disaster for him trying to work through that. Brian Schottenheimer, former Seahawks offensive coordinator, was on that staff as well. Darrell Bevell was on that staff. And we're talking some really good coaches. But Joe Cullen was the defensive coordinator. And even though Jacksonville was far from elite on defense, they made dramatic strides in most major categories compared to the season before. So Jacksonville stumbled. They had a really rough season. Urban Meyer didn't even make it through the entire year with all the stuff that was going on off the field. And they were losing a lot of games. But Joe Cullen, I thought, did a pretty solid job that year as a defensive coordinator, especially when you consider, again, the circus that all these assistant coaches were having to deal with being on Urban Meyer's staff. So I think Joe Cullen is probably target number one for these two teams that the Seahawks want to talk to, that they have to wait until after Sunday's Super Bowl. But staying on Kansas City's staff, going to the offensive coordinator position, Joe Cullen is obviously not going to be the offensive coordinator for the Seahawks, but there is another name that I've started to see make some rounds that could be an intriguing candidate that maybe the Seahawks want to meet with, and that is Joe Blymeyer, who currently right now is the passing game coordinator for the Chiefs, but he has been with Andy Reid basically since he jumped into coaching. This guy had a really good college career as a receiver at Delaware and then jumped right into coaching. He was the football operations intern for the Eagles under Andy Reid from 2007 to 2009, had a brief spell of 3 years at Colorado as an offensive quality control coach. And then he went to Kansas City and he was the offensive quality control coach. There was an assistant quarterback coaching position as well as a receiver coach position. So he has done a little bit of everything in Kansas City. And he's one of those coaches that had a chance to work with Patrick Mahomes when he first arrived from Texas Tech. And any time that you've got that on your resume, it makes you a much more intriguing candidate. So he's coached receivers, he played receiver, he's coached quarterbacks. And from what Andy Reid has said, Blymeyer has a big role in the concepts that the Chiefs run on offense. We're talking about a guy that's really X's and O's centric that could make a lot of sense. He has never been an offensive coordinator at any level. That is one thing that's worth noting here. But we saw Mike Macdonald last Thursday when he was asked about what he's looking for. That was not one of the top things on his list, the experience factor. He's looking for those new ideas, the innovation, guys that can connect with players. And Blymeyer is highly respected in Kansas City. Everybody that he's worked with, nothing but raving reviews. Andy Reid's obviously kept him around for a long time with two different teams. So this guy is a really good ascending coach that could make some sense. And it sounds like he's already doing a lot of the stuff offensive coordinators need to be able to do in terms of being a mad scientist behind the scenes and coming up with schemes and concepts that are a big part of the Kansas City Chiefs offense. So he's got a lot working for him. He could be a candidate that the Seahawks are looking at. And assuming the Saints are hiring Kubiak, the Seahawks will be the only team that's got an offensive coordinator position open. So they may get to pay off their patience once again if they can get an interview with Blymeyer, and he could be somebody of note. I think there's one other coach on San Francisco's staff. We could look potentially at Clint Kubiak's brother, who is on the 49ers staff. He has not been a coordinator, though, to this point. With that being said, the 49ers have a couple of other experienced coaches that are on their current staff. And right now, one of them that really jumps out when you are looking at the 49ers staff that has NFL experience, that is former Chargers coach. And for some reason, I'm going blank here. I had the name down in my notes here. Anthony Lynn. I don't know why I was not remembering that. Anthony Lynn is the other coach that jumped out to me when I was looking today at the 49ers and the Chiefs. And he has previously been a head coach. So that would be another feather in his cap to work with Mike Macdonald, who's looking for any of the mentorship he can in his first head coaching position. But Anthony Lynn has been a head coach. He was an offensive coordinator for the Detroit Lions in 2021. He's had play calling experience early in his career. He's got a run-centric background, being a former running back. I don't know that he's somebody that's going to be on the radar, but he has a ton of experience. He's played that head coaching role before. He's been an invaluable asset as assistant head coach in San Francisco. If that's somebody that you could try to pull away, he's only titled as a running back coach. So I think as an offensive coordinator, you could make a move there if he was interested in coming to Seattle. I don't know that he's a candidate that they are really looking at, but that's certainly a name that jumped out to me from an experience and credential standpoint that would make some sense. But you've got Blymeyer, you've got Joe Cullen on Kansas City staff. I could certainly see the Seahawks playing this process out slowly as they did with the head coach, waiting to get a chance to interview some of these coaches from both the Super Bowl teams. And maybe one of those coaches will end up getting an offensive or defensive coordinator job in Seattle. We will just have to wait and see. Coming up next tonight is NFL Honors, the biggest award that any Seahawk is up for. Rookie of the Year on the defensive side of the football. Is Devon Witherspoon going to bring home the hardware? I'm going to be taking a close look at that award and whether or not he should be viewed as the front runner going into tonight's festivities. Don't go away. You're listening to the Thursday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? Our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to the next level. There's the 2024 Nissan Rogue. It's perfect for city drives and great escapes. It's got the Google built-in, Google Assistant, Google Maps, Google Play Store that are available on the 12.3-inch HD touchscreen infotainment system. And the 2024 Rogue is the perfect mid-size crossover for your next adventure. Or maybe you want to try out the 2024 Nissan Armada that will change what you expect from a full-size SUV. Just picture a rugged 4x4 that can also seat up to 8 in first-class luxury and style. Now you can tow bigger and explore further in the 2024 Armada. Take the Nissan Rogue, the Nissan Pathfinder, or the Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. You're listening to the Thursday edition of Locked On Seahawks. It's your host, Corbin Smith. A special thanks to all the 12s out there. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Make sure to check out Locked On's first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for your 24/7 coverage of the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Devon Witherspoon is looking to make some history tonight for the Seattle Seahawks. Second straight year that Seattle has had a finalist for Defensive Rookie of the Year. Reek Woolen last year finished in third place in balloting. Unfortunately, did not get to bring home the hardware. The Seahawks are one of the few teams out there that has never had a Defensive Rookie of the Year. They've had several finalists over the years, including Woolen last season, and now Witherspoon this season. And certainly there's going to be some great competition for this award. Jalen Carter, who many Seahawk fans were hoping the team would draft to bolster their defensive line last year, they decided to go with Witherspoon. Carter had a very good rookie season for the Philadelphia Eagles, even though he only started one game, had 6 sacks, had a really good year as a rotational defensive lineman. He's going to have a very bright future moving forward in Philadelphia. And then Will Anderson, the pass rusher from Alabama, he had 7 sacks this year, was a big part of the Texans getting to double-digit wins, winning a playoff game, and winning their division. He's also a player that looks like he is going to be a superstar in the league. And so you've got those two. You've got Joey Porter Jr. from the Steelers, who had a really good year. Only 1 interception, just like Devon Witherspoon, but had some very good numbers in coverage for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And this race could really boil down to those 2 linemen, Joey Porter Jr. and Devon Witherspoon. Those 4, those could be the players that end up really battling for this out of the 5 nominees. I think that this absolutely, and this is not me being a homer because I cover the Seahawks and I'm a beat reporter for the Seahawks. This is just a football nut coming out here. But I look at this group of players. Jalen Carter, Will Anderson had fantastic seasons. There's no question about it. Joey Porter Jr., I think, quietly had an excellent year. In Pittsburgh, didn't get a lot of the pub that Devon Witherspoon and some of these other high-profile rookies did as a first-round pick, and he played really well where his dad played for a long time in Pittsburgh. I think you can make cases for all these players, but at the same time, it just feels like you look at the whole body of work and you just watch the film, you look at the stats, whatever you look at here, and this feels like it should absolutely be Devon Witherspoon's award. And the first big reason why I think that this should be Devon Witherspoon's night and that he is going to get that first Rookie of the Year on defense for the Seahawks, it's all about the history here. Devon Witherspoon had one of the greatest seasons that we have seen in the last 20 plus years by any player, not just rookies. In fact, he became only the 7th player since 1999 to have 3 sacks, 8 tackles for loss, and 16 pass breakups in a single season. Only 7 players have done that. And you look at some of the names that did this. Rodney Harrison, multi-Super Bowl winning safety. Rondé Barber, Hall of Fame corner. Takeo Spikes, one heck of a linebacker for the Bills, the Bengals, 49ers. J.J. Watt, maybe the best season by a defender in NFL history that year with 16 pass breakups as a defensive lineman is just insane. Darryl Smith was a very underrated player. So was Carlos Dansby. Seahawks fans know him from his days in Arizona. But Witherspoon is the only rookie on that list of 7 players. We're talking about a lot of veterans there, a couple of Hall of Fame talents on that list, borderline Hall of Famers in Takeo Spikes, Rodney Harrison. That is an elite group, exclusive company that Devon Witherspoon put himself in this year, and he's the only player that achieved that feat as a rookie on that list. I think by that alone, that Devon Witherspoon, the history that he made this year, showing all that he can do, how versatile of a player he is, and just how dynamic of a talent that he is. I think that he deserves the award for that reason alone, but there's other reasons why I think that Little Spoon absolutely should be upgrading himself to Big Spoon with a Rookie of the Year award. It isn't just that historic season that he put together that no other rookie has ever done since 1999. Look at the pass rushing aspect. He only blitzed 30 times this season, according to Pro Football Focus, and he turned that into 10 pressures, 3 sacks, and 3 batted passes. That is incredible production and efficiency with limited opportunities. It seems like every time Seahawks decided to send him, he was going to make something great happen. And that's part of the intrigue of now putting him with Mike Macdonald. And this is also a player who is an exclusive company for the 2023 season with Paulson Adebo of the Saints. They are the only 2 players at the quarterback position this year that were in the top 10, according to Pro Football Focus, in disrupted passes, forced incompletions. They were the only 2 players that did it both in man and in zone coverage. They were both in the top 10 for percentage of forced incompletions. Only 2 corners achieved that. You didn't see Sauce Gardner on both those lists. That typically is not something that happens much because most cornerbacks in the NFL, they are either better at man or better at zone, and there's usually a discrepancy there in the stats. Your elite corners, it might not be as noticeable, but everybody's got a strength, and Devon Witherspoon was equally impressive both as a man and zone corner this year. In man coverage, he only gave up 7 receptions on 15 targets. He had 3 pass breakups. Didn't give up a touchdown. He was fantastic in man coverage. In zone coverage, not quite as good from the standpoint he gave up a few touchdowns, but still had a bunch of pass breakups. Completion percentage under 60%, in the top 15 in the league for fewest yards given up in zone coverage. He was elite both as a man and zone cover corner. Not many guys are able to do that in a single season. You just don't see statistics like that. And the last thing that I'm going to mention here, the run defense. Seattle's run defense was atrocious this year, and that is a well-documented issue. They were 31st in the NFL in rushing yards given up, and Witherspoon missed some tackles. He had 11 missed tackles this season. Sometimes he wants to go for that big hit, and it ends up costing him. But more times than not, he connects, and he delivers bone-jarring hits out there, and he's able to knock guys over. Imagine how bad the Seahawks run defense would have been without Devon Witherspoon out there. He had 5 tackles for loss against the run this year as a cornerback. That's a very high number, especially considering he missed a few games due to injury. He was in the top 10 in the NFL for corners in run stops, run stop percentage, total tackles. The Seahawks would have been in a world of hurt without him coming up to make plays in the run game with the struggles they had at the other positions at all 3 levels. So I think considering how bad that run defense for the Seahawks was, he was a rare bright spot. And compared to his peers, obviously, he put up really good numbers as well. You can look at the tackle numbers and say, well, he had a lot of opportunities. That's very true. But to still be in the top 10 in run stop percentage, That tells you how much of an impact that he was having for this football team in that capacity. So I think when you look at the entire body of work, Jalen Carter in a lot of seasons probably would have had a good enough season, and maybe he still wins that award tonight. He did have 50 pressures. He had 6 sacks, played really solid run defense. Will Anderson had almost 70 pressures. He had 7 sacks. So these two guys were very effective. But when you consider that Devon Witherspoon had half the number of sacks that Jalen Carter had on just 30 pass rushing reps, when Jalen Carter had over 400 pass rushing opportunities. Same thing for Will Anderson, roughly half of Anderson's total of sacks produced by Devon Witherspoon. And then he had 3 swatted passes, the run stuffs, his coverage numbers, both as a man and zone corner. I think you look at that entire body of work, and Devon Witherspoon, without a doubt to me, is the best rookie in the NFL on the defensive side of the football this year. And I don't really think it was that close. And I know that there's a chance that those guys that have more sacks, they tend to get more of the attention for this award. But the fact that Witherspoon did get 3 sacks and was so effective rushing the passer, and he had a pick 6, he won Defensive Rookie of the Month, he won Defensive Player of the Week that week that he had the pick 6. I mean, he just did so many great things this year that should have put him into the national limelight, that I think that he is going to win this award, and he should. He just, in terms of a full body of work, being able to do everything, he did everything for the Seattle Seahawks, and it still feels like there's a lot of room for him to grow, which is scary for the rest of the league. Really was one of the bright spots for the Seahawks, lived up to that top 5 selection. We'll see if he gets that award and becomes the first Seahawk to win Defensive Rookie of the Year when NFL Honors kicks off here in a few hours in Las Vegas. Up next, going to be shifting away from awards season to the Senior Bowl on defense. The Seahawks have a lot of questions at the linebacker position. I'm going to be looking at a handful of players that were in Mobile that could be potential options for the Seahawks to try to fill the void in the middle of their defense. That's coming up next year on our Thursday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by Robinhood Retirement. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at Robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of first 3% match. And you must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer. You're listening to the Thursday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. A special thanks to each and every one of the 12s out there. Greatly appreciate you making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. The Senior Bowl officially in the books. We've looked at quarterbacks. We've looked at offensive and defensive line, some of the areas that the Seahawks are expected to be interested in the early rounds, looking to bolster their roster next season. But if there is a position where the Seahawks may be in the most dire straits right now, it is the linebacker position. And a lot of that has to do with free agency coming up. Bobby Wagner, Jordan Brooks, Devin Bush, all 3 of those players, they're the only ones that started games at linebacker for the Seahawks this year. All 3 of them are slated to be unrestricted free agents when the new league year starts on March 13th. We only have a little over a month until free agency kicks off in the NFL, and the Seahawks currently don't have anybody with starting experience other than Nick Bellore, who hasn't been a starting linebacker for a long time in the NFL. They don't have anybody else that has started a game there. So this is certainly a position that they are going to be keeping a close eye on. And I will admit, of the position groups in this year's draft class, this is not one that I am overly excited about in terms of top tier talent and depth, because I don't think the linebacker position checks off either one of those boxes. I don't see any inside linebackers that are can't-miss prospects that have a chance to go super early in the first round. Maybe there's one or two guys that could sneak into the back half of the first round. You have some day two guys, and then there's a big drop-off, and that was evident at the Senior Bowl as well. And looking at the group of players that participated this weekend in Mobile, Cedric Gray from North Carolina would easily be my number one linebacker from this group. And he is the player on this list that I could absolutely see sneaking into the back half of the first round. Right now, I've got a late second, early third round grade on him. He's got enough size. He's 235 pounds. You want to talk about a guy that has racked up a lot of numbers at North Carolina. He had 5 forced fumbles the last 2 years. He's racked up tackles in bunches. This is a guy that flies all over the field. Sometimes you can see the coverage stuff get away from him a little bit, but he has the athleticism. He has the sideline-to-sideline speed. And I think with a strong combine performance that Cedric Gray could be the player from this group that maybe jumps up, especially for teams that need linebackers. He may go a little earlier maybe than his talent suggests, just because that is a position group that there will be several teams that will be looking to upgrade. And this is not an overly deep linebacking group, but he would easily be the number one linebacker on this list. I think that it would be a little closer call if the number 2 linebacker on my list, Peyton Wilson from NC State, didn't have the injury history. I think if you are just comparing these two players, they're built very similar. In fact, they both are around 235 pounds. They have very similar movement skills. They both tallied a ton of tackles and forced fumbles and sacks at the college level. Both these guys were highly productive in the state of North Carolina, ACC play. So these guys are fantastic players. But really what the difference here, and Peyton Wilson could fall further than this. I have third-round talent for him. He's had a bunch of injuries. He tore his ACL in high school. He missed most of the 2021 season with another injury. He had another year in college where he missed a big chunk of the year. He has had a lot of issues staying healthy. Now, the last 2 seasons, he's been able to stay on the field. He's been productive, but I could see that injury history. He's a guy where physicals during the combine, that is going to be a big part of the evaluation. What does he look like health-wise? If you're just looking at the player, he certainly fits the bill as a day 2 linebacker. And I think both these guys at 235, they fit even in today's trajectory where we're seeing smaller linebackers. They really fit that mold of being a bit more traditional in terms of size, but they can do the coverage things. They can rush the passer. And so I think they're both intriguing day 2 guys. One other player that I have on this list, because the Senior Bowl listed him as a linebacker, is James Williams from Miami. Now, he played safety for the Hurricanes. He's listed at 218, so that may seem too small to play linebacker, but this is a guy that smacks people. That's really good size for a safety. You could probably put on another 5-6 pounds to get him in that 225 range. And there are some pretty good linebackers in today's NFL with the spread offense, the passing game on offense. You are seeing teams that are unleashing these smaller linebackers. And James Williams has the physicality, a very productive player at Miami. And obviously being a former safety, he should be an outstanding cover linebacker if he's going to be playing that position. They had him playing there in Mobile. And so this is a player because of positional versatility. There may be teams that still view him as a safety. They may view him as a linebacker. It really depends on the testing, but the Senior Bowl, that's where they wanted to play him. They tested him at the linebacker spot. He can play really well in the box. And so I'm intrigued, but there's always a little bit of a risk when we're talking about these guys changing positions. And I still have some reservations about a player that size being more than a passing down linebacker, even in today's NFL. So third round seems about right for a guy that if he was just playing safety, that's probably where I would about have him at as well. I see some productivity, certainly a guy that has flashed first, second round talent. Consistency hasn't always been there, but I got a third round grade. I think he's a guy that could be intriguing in Mike Macdonald's defense with how much they like to send defensive backs on blitzes. Maybe that is George Jamal Adams' replacement, a guy that can play linebacker, but also is a safety. And then after that point, 4 other players here that I've got down on my list that participate in the Senior Bowl. There's a pretty big drop-off. Now, Trevin Wallace, he does come from the SEC. He's played against top-notch competition, has made some plays, and I think he's one of the better pass rushers from this group. And he's played in a defense where they've kicked out a lot of NFL talent at Kentucky. So I think early day 3 is about where you would see the sweet spot for him. not quite as strong, not quite as big as a few of these guys that are ahead of him on the list, but he's certainly a good athlete. Maybe he gets himself into day two if he has a really good combine or pro day performance. We've seen some guys now that aren't running at the combine, they wait till their pro day, but he is a player to watch. And then Tyrese Knight from UTEP, he actually was a Shrine Bowl invitee and then got upgraded to the Senior Bowl at the last minute. So he got to play in the biggest all-star game showcase, another player that has really taken advantage of his opportunities. And you look at the stats. Now, competition is going to be something to consider, but he had a solid week in Mobile. This is a player that went from being undrafted off the radar for most people into, in my opinion, being squarely in the mix to be a 6th or 7th round pick. So I think he is certainly one to keep a close eye on. And then Jontre Hunter from Georgia State is another player that would be in that mix, coming from a smaller Division I school, put up some pretty good numbers there, is now starting to get on the radar for teams after participating in the Senior Bowl. Another player where there's some questions about his ability to get off blocks, his size, but he's a really athletic player that made a lot of plays in the Sun Belt Conference. And so I've got a 7th grade, borderline undrafted grade on him. Same for Nathaniel Watson out of Mississippi State, an SEC player. I just don't see the athletic upside from him on the field. Maybe he proves me wrong in the combine, but I don't see a guy that is going to check off the boxes of an every down linebacker in the NFL because of some athleticism concerns. But all of those players could potentially be drafted, and most of them fit the mold, even in today's NFL, being a more prototypical linebacker. You got a lot of guys in there that are in that 230, 235 pound range. And so there's some really solid players here if the Seahawks can get an opportunity to draft them. I don't know that there are very many early starters in this group. The Seahawks might be looking for that, but a lot of your top linebackers were either underclassmen or they were players that did not participate in the Senior Bowl. There are a few other names that we will talk about as we get deeper into the process, but certainly there were some players in Mobile that could fit the Seahawks' needs, potentially in the 2nd and 3rd round, if they are looking at somebody like a Peyton Wilson from NC State, who has the talent. He's just had some injury issues. But all of those players that I mentioned there could be on the radar for the Seahawks to varying degrees, depending on whether they need starters. If they re-sign a few of these guys, maybe they're just looking for depth pieces that they can develop. And that's where some of those other players, like bottom of the list down there, for example, from Georgia State, Jontre Hunter, or maybe Tyrese Knight from UTEP, those players are the ones that I would look at late if you're looking to develop that maybe can get on the field on defense for you within a couple years. But the Seahawks right now have to figure out what path they want to go, who they're going to re-sign. Is Bobby Wagner going to be back? Jordan Brooks seems like the most likely, but he may be the most expensive of those linebackers to bring back since he's in the prime of his career. So we'll see what the Seahawks choose to do, but I would be very surprised if they're not picking at least one linebacker in the draft in April because of the state of that position and the need to have some younger guys that they can develop there. As always, you can follow me on X and Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Coming up tomorrow on Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks, I'll be joined by Nick Lee. The two of us will be diving into some potential free agents from the 49ers and Chiefs that the Seahawks could be taking a look at this spring. You won't want to miss it. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday, and thanks for listening in. Go Hawks.